Stand up, you've been sitting way too long.
Welcome to this special edition of the Ralph Nader Radio Hour. I'm Steve Scrovan. In this series, Ralph and constitutional scholar Bruce Fein will lay out articles in the impeachment of President Donald J. Trump. Count 7, violation of the Appointments Clause.
This one will really amaze our listeners. Why was it put in there by our framers? And has there ever been any president that comes close to violating it?
Well, the framers in the Appointments Clause, again, like the Treaty Clause, they didn't trust the president, to be impartial and have the interest of the nation at heart in making appointments. They thought that the president would favor his friends and for corrupt reasons make appointments that really would undermine rather than strengthen our national policies. And therefore, it said, no, the Senate has to confirm by a simple majority vote all principal officers of the United States, including Supreme Court justices. And the confirmation is by a simple majority. But they didn't want persons exercising these policy-making positions without any Senate scrutiny, that they had to undergo examination, background, and even public opinion through the hearing process in order to be appointed to these important positions. And now we have President Trump routinely has acting secretaries, half a dozen or maybe half the cabinet. These are persons who have not been confirmed by the Senate for the positions they're occupying. In the White House itself, the fact is we now have a national security advisor who's more important oftentimes than the Secretary of State, not confirmed, John Bolton, Henry Kissinger. We have the White House counsel, oftentimes more important than the Attorney General, not confirmed by the Senate of the United States. After all, if these people are competent, what's the fear of having a Senate confirmation vote? The whole purpose is to ensure that we have higher quality people who are not simply political cronies of the President of the United States.
You said, for example, when a vacancy occurs at a cabinet level or an agency level like the Environmental Protection Agency or the Bureau of Land Management, the deputy steps into the place that has been vacated by the official. But what Trump has done is he put all kinds of officials at the cabinet and sub-cabinet level, and they're called acting heads of the Bureau of Land Management, acting heads of various cabinet levels. And you're saying that's per se unconstitutional.
Yeah, it is. I mean, remember, when the deputies are exercising powers by delegation, the deputies are Senate confirmation positions. They just don't walk off the streets. And to show you how ludicrous the current practice is, you require Senate confirmations of the Board of Trustees of the Smithsonian, or the Kennedy Center. And yet these very, very more powerful positions in the cabinet, the Senate acquiesces and the president is simply making these unilateral decisions. And we get individuals with no scrutiny whatsoever. And it shows with regard to the erratic nature of the way in which the administration operates.
Well, then why does the U.S. Senate abdicate what is a very personal constitutional duty, which is to advise and consent or confirm or refuse to confirm powerful nominees by the president over the federal executive branch?
Well, I think it's largely due to the alignment of these members with their party more than to the Constitution. So they kind of a club up there. They say, all right, we'll let the presidents kind of do whatever they want. So when the Republicans there, they can do what they want. Or Democrats there, the Republicans won't scream. Because both parties now view the presidency as virtually everything, in part because Congress has so surrendered power. Remember, the 98% of the federal workforce works for the executive branch. Virtually all of the $4.3 trillion, it's all spent by the executive branch. We've created the equivalent of an emperor in the White House, and the stakes are so high and so big. Both parties have colluded, if you will, to keep heaping more and more power on the president and hoping, okay, at least when we get there, we'll get all the goodies too. And it's a breakdown of the whole idea that our uniqueness as a nation was process, was separation of powers, that we preferred a liberty-centered universe rather than empire that runs abroad in search of monsters to destroy. And that's why I believe both parties continue whoever is in the White House, their president or the others, acquiesce in continuing to make the president indistinguishable from a Roman emperor. And that's worrisome. And it's even the smaller things, Ralph. I mean, I've noticed, I've been here a long time like you. Remember when Nixon was in the White House, he'd go make a speech at a hotel. There'd be a few police motorcycles in front of him. They'd shut down, a street around Lafayette Park for, 5 minutes or something. Now, when the president goes out, like 150 motorcycles in advance, 15 SUVs behind him, everything gets blocked off from Lafayette Square to DuPont Circle. We're treating it like, the Caesar coming back from Gaul and going down the streets of Rome.
At this point, I can just hear some of our listeners saying, wait a minute, all this rampant lawlessness that transcends party differences, they're committed by Democrats, Republicans, and every decade it seems to get worse in terms of the overreach and the lawlessness of the president, whoever president may be. And Donald Trump has pushed that envelope further than any president in American history. Why can't people go to the courts and challenge this? Why can't citizens file a lawsuit against Congress or against the White House and say, you're violating our Constitution, you're violating the Clean Air Act, you're violating the campaign finance laws?
Well, it's because there are all these technical terms called standing, ripeness, mootness, immunities that make it virtually impossible for citizens to bring the suit, even though they basically end up bearing the hardships and the privations that come from the lawlessness.
People say, Bruce, those words you just uttered are gobbledygook. What do you mean by that?
Well, they're gobbledygook, but they're gobbledygook that the judges use to say, we're going to take you out of court. For example, Congress at one time, I remember the Libya illegal war, went to court to try to claim Obama was doing something illegal, and the members filed suit individually. I remember Ron Paul, Walter Jones, and the court said, well, listen, you don't have standing, you have to have Congress do it. And members of Congress can't be sued because they have speech and debate immunity, and the courts will say there's a political question unless you show there's a direct and immediate injury to you, like you've been killed because toxic water or something, you can't bring a lawsuit. That's just the way we are. And there's another element that comes into play too.
Well,
Ralph.
before you get into that, what you're saying is the courts are saying right up to the Supreme Court that 325 million Americans individually or collectively have no standing to sue to stop government lawlessness, whether it's in the executive or legislative, or one might add, judicial branches. What does that mean, no standing to sue? Where did that come from? Seems to be the definition of tyranny.
Yeah, well, it is. I mean, but the courts just don't have a backbone here. They don't want to get involved, and I believe they concoct these excuses. I've often argued, for example, on the Declare War Clause, who pays the price of these illegal wars? The huge taxes, the unbuilt schools, unrepaired roads and bridges, the men and women who go abroad to fight and risk the last full measure of devotion for nothing. It's the American people are the victims of these illegal wars. You'd figure they would be the first people to have standing because the injury afflicts them. But the courts say, no, it's too remote. You go ask Congress to do something about this, or the executive branch. But you're complaining against both branches, both irresponsibly. How can you expect them to fix it? They're the problem. But the fact is, I think we're not going to get the courts to intercede. That's just the nature of their temperament. Historically, they have not. And that means it's up to the citizens to make Constitution the battleground of politics and tell the Congress, I'm not voting for you unless you exercise your responsibilities. If you don't, you're out of office. We basically have a collective abdication of responsibility in the corridors of power, Ralph. And each year that elapses, more and more power, more and more secrecy, all in the executive branch. We're at, I think, an inflection point. And if we don't draw the line someplace, even if it's true some other presidents got away with it, we're back to where we were before 1776. A king, whether we call him a president or not, with limitless power, and we'll have a government issued by edicts coming out of the White House.
It's amazing, Bruce Fein, when you reread the Declaration of Independence and the complaints of the signers of the Declaration of Independence against King George III and all the things he did against freedom and justice, is an uncanny resonance with the behavior of some of our recent presidents.
And that is count 7 in the impeachment of Donald Trump, violation of the Appointments Clause. Join us again for count 8, violation of the Presentiments Clause.